very, very young, only know her from her images of, she's just, what do you call it, quintessential person. So I just thought that was lots of fun, because this whole idea, getting to know you, is what we're going to talk about today. This idea of getting to know who we are, getting to know ourselves, the truth of ourselves, so that we can, all of a sudden get bright and breezy. All of a sudden we can get bright and breezy with our life experience, because we're seeing ourselves in a new way. We're learning new things about ourselves. We're looking through the filter of some of the icky stuff that shows up on the, the stuff we think is true about us or about our experience, and see beneath that, so that we can actually appreciate this life experience that we're having right now. Love the life we're living. Not all of us love the life we're living. Do you realize that? If you look around the world and look at some of the headlines, not everybody's loving the life they're living. And so our work together today is about this idea of the power of the truth. And when we talk about truth, exactly what Glenda said. Our author, Debbie Ford, tells us truth is really the expression of your divinity. The expression of your soul's journey. That's what it's about, the expression of your true divinity. But so much of the way we see ourselves and the way we show up in the world isn't about that. It's not about an expression of that or seeing that about ourselves. So that's what we're going to talk about this whole month. We're talking about self-reflection, living an examined life, so that when we actually show up in relationship with each other and in relationship with ourselves, we're knowing the truth of who we are. We're knowing who we are. Like Linda said, it requires us to be deeply honest with ourselves about the way our life is showing up. To look at all of it. Those of you who are in 12-step programs know it is absolutely vital for us to take a fearless moral inventory. To take an inventory of how stuff is showing up for us. Do we want to see it all? Probably not. Is it important for us to open it to the light and examine it? Absolutely. So that's what we're going to talk about. Because the truth that we bring to our experience, the truth that we know about ourselves, beyond the lies that we've learned about ourselves, beyond the deceptions that we've, sort of accumulated over time, those of us who have more years on the planet than some of you beautiful young folks have accumulated more opportunities to absorb more deception, more lies about who we think we might be. And so this whole idea is, when we don't know who we are, it has an impact on how much joy, how much harmony, how much appreciation we can bring forth for our life in the present moment. It determines our experiences in life. When we don't know who we are, it's different than we do when we do know who we are. And sometimes, this is the truth, we don't even recognize that we're not telling ourselves the truth about ourselves. We're showing up in such habituated ways and such patterned ways of being that we don't even recognize that we're not living our radiance, that we're not living this beauty that we are, that we're actually living some sort of small version of ourselves. We're living this limited version of ourselves. And most of it is because we have these hidden agreements that we've made along the way, these past agreements these contracts that we've made with life, with other people in our experience, with experiences themselves. We've got these agreements that are in place that we don't even know about until we take time to reflect and look at these areas where there are limitations and where we're not feeling whole. When we do self-reflection and when we're looking at our life experience, we start to see those areas where we're not feeling whole, where we're not feeling our radiant selves. So what I like the work of Don Miguel Ruiz, and he has a wonderful book called The Voice of Knowledge. I'm going to be reading from it in a minute. I like the opening stories that we tell each other. And much of Don Miguel Ruiz's work is around the stories that we tell ourselves. But he says, we live a story of our own creation without noticing it. So like the invitation from the opening video that Glenda chose, you know, what story are you living? Are you the chicken? Are you the eagle? Are you the little boy? What story are you living in your life experience? Because guess what? The central character in our story, we're the star. We get to be the star of our own story. We get to assign roles to everybody else in our story. We get to write the script for ourselves and for everybody else. And we get to create all the players, the scenarios. We're it. We get to create our story and live from that perspective. So I want to bring attention to the PowerPoint. I've chosen this image. This is the storyteller part of us. The one that, you know, is all about running the show and creating the drama. So Don Miguel Ruiz says, before I was born, a whole society of storytellers were already here. The story was ongoing, and from their story, I learned how to create my own. The storytellers teach us how to be human. They tell us what we are, a boy or a girl. Then they tell us who we are and who we should or shouldn't be. Think about your own life. They teach us how to be a woman or a man, to be a proper, decent woman, a strong, brave man. They give us a name, an identity, and they tell us the role that we are playing in their story. It's real important. How do we fit into the picture? They prepare us to live in a human world. And then he goes on to say, when I studied the story of my own life, I discovered that everything in my story was about me. Of course, it has to be that way because I'm the center of my perception, and the story is from my point of view. I create my character based on what I agree to believe about myself. And this is the key sentence in that. I create my story based on what I agree to believe about myself. And if I'm not knowing and believing the truth of who I really am, my radiant divinity, if my awareness is not aligned with this inner knowing of who I really am, beyond any of the labels, beyond any of the roles, beyond any of the things that people have told me I am, if I don't know the truth of who I am, I'm going to start believing some other version of my story. So it's really important. The storyteller part of us is really important because I base who I am on what I agree to believe about myself. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And most of what we agree to believe about ourselves, guess what? It's based on old patterns, old habits, other people's ideas. It's based on domestication, as Don Miguel Ruiz would call it. It's based on whatever our family system was like, what our culture was like, what our experiences have shown us is the truth. And sometimes it's the truth, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's fiction. And so what happens is we get into these habits of thinking, these patterns of thinking. And this self-reflection that we're talking about is a practice that we can bring forth to help us see these patterns, to see these habitual ways of thinking about ourselves and our life experience, so that if it is not the truth, if it is a version of fiction, we can start to unpack it, to deframe it, and to create a new story for ourselves that is more in alignment with the truth of who we really are. See, what happens is, from our infancy, we start repeating these stories to ourselves. The patterns start getting imprinted in our brain. Our brains are very, plastic. Neuroplasticity is a key factor of our actual brain. And so what happens is we repeat these ideas about ourselves over and over and over, and then guess what? It gets to be a groove. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Lucky for you young ones that are here, because you have an opportunity before those grooves get too deep to reprogram. Some of us have a lot of reprogramming to do, yeah? Some of us have some grooves that are pretty darn deep, and some of them are very deceptive. They're not showing us our truth. So that movie, Stella Gets a New Groove? Well, guess what? We all get to get a new groove. We all get to get a new perception about who we really are that is based on the truth of our being. So we have to ask ourselves, are all these things I think about myself the truth? Is it true? Work with Byron Katie. Is it true? Is it true? Ask ourselves, is it true or is it a lie? Is it true or is it fiction? Is it true or is it some sort of distortion of the truth? Most of what we believe about ourselves is a distortion. It's not an actual lie. It's just a distortion of the truth, right? Because some things could be true, but a lot of stuff, no. So if it's the truth, if it is the truth about who we are, we recognize it as our authentic self. We recognize it as that place of peace within. We recognize it as this place of joy and happiness and radiance and exuberance and enthusiasm. We recognize it as that. It has a quality about it that is different than the deceptions that we tell ourselves. Because the stuff that gets our attention, the deceptions in our life experience, are about things where we're living small, where we're limiting ourselves, where we're suffering, where we have drama. So if you're where we worry, where we're agitated, those things are probably about not true aspects of who you're being, who you really are. So I want to share with you, I was trying to think what was I willing to share in this group about, some of my own stories I've told myself. And over the years, I need to say that some of the stories we tell ourselves can be beneficial when they show up in our radiance. So one of my stories is I'm very responsible. And I'm responsible, and that's how come Glenda and I can partner together and create things like Common Ground, along with all of you. It's the responsible part of me that is awesome, but there's a part of that where there becomes this distortion, and that I'm responsible turns into I need to fix everything for everybody. Okay? I'm responsible to do it all by myself. I can handle this. My first marriage, my famous last words of my first husband, handle it, Jude. Handle it. And I learned that I could handle just about anything. Just about anything. And part of that was that when learning how to be responsible and learning how to handle it, Jude, there was a part of me that moved into this unhealthy area of not really taking care of myself, not really thinking much about my own needs, not really thinking much about what I need as a human being, this suffering, this drama. I ended up in a work situation that was, beyond dysfunctional, immensely dysfunctional, to the point where I became suicidal. Now, I took this quality of being responsible, and it's sort of the flip side of that, and I need to be able to see this about myself, because one of my characteristics is being responsible, but it can get very distorted. Do you understand what I'm saying? We all do this. We all do this in so many ways. So when you start to suffer, when you're suicidal, when you get to that place where you're on your knees and you're very limited and you're living a small version of who you really are, this is time to look at what is the distortion around this experience, you see. And part of it is that, do you know that science tells us we have more than 60,000 thoughts in a 24-hour period? 60,000 thoughts. And this is the remarkable thing. Most of those thoughts are the same thoughts over and over and over. They're the same thoughts we had yesterday. They're the thoughts we're having today, and guess what? They're the thoughts we're going to have tomorrow. Talk about creating the groove. 60,000 times I have an opportunity to think about whatever this thing is, and then I'm going to do it all over again tomorrow. And I did it yesterday. See, we get these habituated patterns of thinking, and they endlessly repeat themselves over and over. No wonder we start believing them. No wonder we start acting from these places in ourselves. No wonder we forget who we are. Those grooves get real deep. So the challenge is to look at what we're believing, look at what we're thinking. That's what this whole practice is about, this self-reflection. Stop. Well, little kids, stop, look, and listen. Stop long enough to breathe into the experience to see where you're not living your radiance, you're not living your truth, so that you've got the possibility to create a new neural pathway, get a new groove. Problem is, if the thought pattern is the truth, if it's aligned with our essential divinity, if it's aligned with who we really are, it reflects the presence of the divine anyway. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to have any words to describe it. It just is. When we are in our radiant soul's expression, it just is. It just is. But when we're not, then we can identify the suffering, the pain, the drama, the stories that are driving our lives, and that's a big deal. So it's a problem if we're creating distortions around how we're showing up. So I was thinking about some of the stories that I know we tell ourselves. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I'll tell you what, when I was going through divorce, everybody's going to betray me. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm not pretty. I'm not smart. I'm not accomplished. I'm not capable. I'm all alone in the world. I'm going to die a lonely old woman. These are stories that the world is a scary place. I don't know how to function in this world by myself. These are stories that we tell ourselves when we're not knowing who we really are. We've got to look at these stories so that we can not believe that about ourselves. It's limiting. You've got your own stories. You've got your own ways of showing up, your own distortions that you're telling yourself. The truth is, you're whole, you're holy, you're capable, you're beautiful. You can do anything you want. You can go anywhere you want. You can create whatever you want. You're not this limited version of who you think you are. So here's the invitation. How do we do this? How do we step into this? Okay, the first thing is, in order to release the power of the truth in your own life experience, the greatest expression of who you really are, of your soul, the way we do that is, you gotta be interested in doing it. You gotta say, you know what, this is important to me. I recognize that my soul's journey is important to me. Gotta care about it. Gotta commit to it. I care. I am not gonna go through the rest of my life, zoned out, numb to life. I care about this. I want to work on this. The next thing we have to be able to do is examine this stuff. Where I think I'm unworthy, where I think I'm unlovable, where I think that I can handle it, Jude. Examine these things and see, is this the truth? Is this in alignment with my greatest good? Is this in alignment with my holiest, whole self? Is this a deception? Is this part of my story? Is this part of the story that I learned when I came into this world? Is this somebody else's story? Whose story is this? Is this a deception? What patterns am I creating in my life? How do I keep living this story over and over and over and over again? Classic example in alcohol, usually Al-Anon. You keep marrying the same drunk over and over and over. Some of you can relate, I know that. Then the third piece is it takes practice. You've got to take the time to do the work. You've got to pay attention. You've got to do a practice. You've got to take inventory on a daily basis. You've got to catch yourself in the act. We talked about that last week. You've got to see yourself. You've got to be able to witness yourself in action so that you can spot these places that are not the truth about you. Then you got to stick with it. You got to establish a pattern. You got to be very mindful of how you're showing up every minute. It's this mindfulness that helps us ground a new belief about ourselves. Find yourself slipping, oh, I'm not worthy, I'm not pretty, I'm too fat, I'm whatever. Catch yourself, pull yourself back, ground yourself, and start believing something new about yourself. And guess what? Do you know how long it took to get that groove in there? Guess what? You don't turn a yacht around in a minute. All of a sudden, it takes a while to get that whole thing reversed so that you can start heading in a new direction to believe new things about yourself. So like Betty White, I just loved her. I loved her. Her energy is the same today as it is then. That's the truth of who she is. I really believe that. Her truth was being reflected in that song. If you want to know the truth of who you are, you have to notice the times when you're suddenly bright and breezy, when you're lighter, when you're showing up with a sense of delight in life, that's probably when you're aligned with the truth of your soul. You have to be willing to learn new things about yourself day by day. And never forget, you are agreeing to believe the story that you created about yourself. And you have the power to create a new story for yourself that is in greater alignment with the truth of who you really are.